Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second stream of the day. This, of course, is our conference interactive stream. So I'm going to provide very little interaction, or sorry, lots of interaction, but very little introduction as we get started here. And I'm going to welcome in today's co-host, Dr. Todd Greentree, who needs very little introduction for most of us out there. He is an author, a historian, pretty much an expert on most things going on in the world today, and of course was a former Foreign Service officer and served in lots of hotspots around the world. Welcome, Todd. How are you?
Hi, I'm pretty good.
Good. It's good to see you. How's your pandemic going?
Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Indeed. So, folks, as you may know, you from tuning into the first Conference Interactive, this is all about your questions, and I certainly have a couple questions for Todd to get things rolling. But enter your questions into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to them in turn. And your questions can certainly be about what you've seen and heard during this past week of conference. It can also be about some of the things going on in the news today that you'd like Todd's thoughts on. So, Todd, let me pitch you a specific question to start with, because I know this is a topic that's near and dear to you, which is really about disinformation. We heard a couple of speakers talking about disinformation. Obviously, we are all always sort of interested in this topic. What jumps out at you from the conference around disinformation, or even more broadly, some of your thoughts on this current world of media disinformation that we live in?
So, okay, thanks for the question, because that's right on theme, disinformation, and of course the intersection with crisis, journalism in crisis, which I think was a really well chosen theme. Um, my general short answer to the question, and first, and then I'm going to give. I thought I would give some general remarks that sort of overview not just the week, but sort of the 2 weeks that the conference has run, directly related. So that will be the longer answer to the question about disinformation. This past week has really hit home for me, anyway. What is happening in the world, and it's just an incredible experience. I think if you think about it, hang on just one second. Pues, estoy en una reunión. Gracias. Sorry, I got some people making noise there. Not kids, but I feel like I've been in the schoolhouse again in what I've learned and picked up from what people have been saying. And if we just go around the world, from Mexico to the Philippines to Hungary to the Ukraine, to China, and just the way we've been bouncing around, it just builds this picture of the degree to which journalism everywhere is being corroded, and that is emblematic of the corrosion of our freedoms and of democracy, and that is even more serious underlying issue, that something that we've taken so intensely for granted as a part of our own being. And in that sense, what we're experiencing, listening to journalists from other parts of the world about their troubles, it's a mirror and it's a reflection to what's has been happening to ourselves. And so, if unless you want to follow up on that, Sandy, I'm gonna just make some remarks for a few minutes, and then we'll switch back.
Yeah, go for
discussion.
it.
Yep. Is that good?
Yep.
So my first reaction to the week, and also to the session that Dana, the week that Dana wrapped up, is wow. And by that, for those of you who have attended multiple sessions, the level, the depth of conversation the quality of people that have been sharing with us. I mean, I just feel so privileged to be sitting here in Santa Fe, and experiencing this. Um, Also, I think a comment about technology, because everything we're doing, all of these discussions intersect with technology. And here we are in two dimensions, having, in other words, a technologically moderated uh, sessions. So when we started out talking about it, it was what everybody else was going through with COVID pandemic, which is moving from real human interaction to, whether it was school or just routine meetings, having to do it through technology was a second best solution. We're adapting. But what I've realized, and Sandy and I have talked about this a little bit, I think that actually what's happening with journalism under fire is that it's not confined to a second best solution. And if we're looking ahead to really realizing what an incredible event journalism under fire will be the next time, that it is evolving as a national and international event, and the addition of the Zoom technology that we're using now is going to not be a second best solution. It's not going to be, well, we can't be in person. That next year we will be in person, and we will also be able to have the technology available. And that's just going to make it an even better event.
Yeah.
And I'm not done with this comment, which is that this, and I hope everybody listening today that will agree with me that this is attributable almost entirely to Sandy and his incredible your incredible efforts in putting this all together and to making it work. Really, really good.
Thank you,
Um,
Todd. It's a
okay.
team effort, though, and most undoubtedly.
With that, I'm gonna turn to some substantive observations about journalism under fire itself, and that is, first of all, personal. Having spent much of my adult life overseas, most of it as a foreign service officer, assigned to U.S. embassies. Pretty much my whole career was back and beyond stuff. Not always appreciated in Washington by the State Department, but always, to use Sandy's favorite word, fascinating. Most of it was dealing with coups and revolution and civil war and unrest. Basically, to much of the time spent in the middle of crises. And as U.S. Foreign Service officer, relationships with journalists were always critical to my ability to perform to perform my duties, but also were a critical element of uh, of the job itself. Like literally in occasions, protecting journalists, taking action to ensure journalists as individuals and freedom of the press, not always successfully, but was respected, and losing any number of people that I knew and some who I consider to be close friends. Um, in these situations, coups, uh, revolutions, stolen elections, all this kind of thing, disinformation always went hand in hand. So what we're experiencing in the US today is kind of shocking because having been overseas, we took it for granted that my friends in the US press corps, for whoever they were working with, whether it was the Miami Herald, the New York Times, the CNN, doesn't matter, that the standards that they represented at bottom were reflections of our First Amendment rights and the importance of freedom of speech. And they were the international arms of that. So we took that for granted, something that I think we've all learned over the past 4 years, that you don't want to do that. It needs active defense. Um, what we've seen in the, in listening to, whether it was about the Philippines or just now the session on China, is how fundamental freedom of the press is to all of our other freedoms. And when press freedoms gets corroded, do the rights and freedoms that we do take for granted. Um, and I think that if I can make a reference, a literary reference, that's still the best novel that deals with this is 1984. That it reflects the full spectrum, all the way from the sort of incompetent but enormously powerful impact that disinformation has had on us in our own country over the past 4 years, all the way up to the incredibly slick, very sophisticated surveillance state that is evolving in China today, at the very high end of totalitarianism. Just a couple of other thoughts. To put it in general context, what is disinformation? What is its significance? Now, remember, I'm a strategy and policy guy, so I think about wars and geopolitical conflict and that sort of thing. But disinformation fits very much in this context. And in terms of strategy, disinformation is an instrument of political warfare. And it has both its informational component, but its technological component is cyber war. So the two things go together. But it boils down to basic things that are common to all forms of warfare. And that is espionage, spying, sabotage, which is using political warfare to physically destroy things. So think about hacking into election systems. That is sabotage. But what we're dealing mostly when we're talking about disinformation is subversion. So espionage, sabotage, and subversion are methods of conducting warfare in which disinformation fits in. So this is in Thucydides in the 5th century Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Just to bring that home, in terms of national security, disinformation played a much different role in 2020 than it did in 2016. And that's because the agencies of the US government, with the exception of the White House and sort of the enablers of the Trump administration spread throughout the administration, the agencies of the US government mobilized in defense of their roles, their institutional roles in the US system of government. In other words, they acted to defend our freedoms and to protect our national security, and they did it successfully. So despite the situation of uncertainty that we're in right now regarding the transition and all of that, don't let that disappear from our recognition and appreciation. It's no surprise that the president fired Chris Krebs, the head of the Homeland Security Cyber and Information Security Infrastructure Security Agency, because this guy has done a fabulous job as a dedicated civil servant over the past years to be the point person, along with the commander of Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, in protecting us from foreign interference. And the fact that all of the intelligence agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, all have said that foreign interference, both on the cyber technology side and on the disinformation side, were kept to extremely minimal levels, and there were no major incidents of foreign interference. So that's extremely important. And I just want to say, make two other quick points, and then I'll stop. One is that what distinguishes the Trump administration in its corrosive and destructive use of information is that if you look at past administrations and make the comparison, what is historically significant is that this is the first administration in the United States that has intentionally set out to corrode and disable the functioning of American democracy and our institutions of government. So if you look at all of the errors and mistakes and whatever your political perspective of pretty much every past administration, this is the difference, that this has been on purpose. And finally, let me just make the circle and sort of jump off so we can go into this past week. One of the common things that every single presentation, every single speaker has had, whether they embedded it into their presentation or it came up in Q&A or they concluded with it, is solutions. How do they fix the particular problems that they're dealing with in their country? How do they defend press freedom? But also, what are the solutions that we all face? Because this is a common problem. And in that, and here's the key, in that, the role of the government, the role of the state is critical. So if you think about it, our First Amendment protects us, provides freedom of speech, and its purpose, its constitutional historical purpose, is to protect us from the interference of government, of the state, in our own freedoms, beginning with our freedom of speech. At the same time, the role of the state is absolutely essential. So we have defined the very purpose of our constitutional order and the United States government as having a primary responsibility of defending it, of defending our freedoms of speech. And that is, and we can get into specifics, that is the thrust of all of the solutions that every single speaker has put out there. And I found that to be a really, really interesting commonality from all of them. So with that, I'll end up and hand it back over to you, Sandy, if you want to turn this into a discussion.
I have a little follow-up I want to make on that. So aside from some pretty spotty journalism in the New York Post reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop, this political campaign or electoral campaign, I think we were all bracing ourselves for some big disinformation-driven surprise. Do you think that the lack of that was really due to, the work of our intelligence community, due to the work of, the US government securing our public square, as it were, from this type of disinformation? I mean, even just hearing Haney Farid last night talking about deep fakes and how easy they are to do and get out there, our lack of that was and has been surprising to me. So where are these attacks? We know there are malicious actors out there that would like to nothing more than to interfere in our electoral process. Why hasn't this happened?
So it didn't happen, although I tend to think whenever I hear that phrase "whole of government," I get a kind of a gag reflex, having lived it and knowing that that's not a real thing. On the other hand, when you're given when you have a specific role focused on doing something very, very concrete, you actually have a pretty amazing ability to organize. And the group of US government officials that includes the military, the intelligence community, and law enforcement in the front end, but it's everybody from the State Department all the way down to state secretaries of state. So the Secretary of State and the state secretaries of state worked together, and they've been working together. It really ramped up following the 2018 midterms. They have been working together and have done so extremely effectively to suppress, and here we're addressing foreign interference. So there was none of this, Russian research, internet research agency sponsored, rallies that were then magnified and manipulated by bots throughout the social media realm. That didn't happen. There were in the 2016 elections, there were attempts to hack every single state's electoral systems to get into the computers. There were partial successes in 3 states only, and everybody was afraid it was going to ramp up. But there were none. None have been were detected whatsoever. So that throws us back, and I really want to talk about the international stuff. I don't want to focus too much on the domestic, but that puts it back into what was the nature. There was huge disinformation, right? I mean, that was happening, but it was happening within our own domestic internet sphere, with the White House at the center. And if you think about it, much of our attention to world events was filtered through the White House, and we weren't even aware of it. It shows you the power of disinformation. In other words, take Mexico and Central America, right? When were we all paying attention? When were we all freaking out about Mexico, Central America, and the border? It was when the president started the tweet storm and started making this issue out of we're being invaded by rapists and murderers from Central America. And then it went away. That lasted about 3 months, and we had all these crises, and then it went away. So it's hard, it's hard for us. It's very, very hard. It's challenging, even though the information is out there, to actually follow what's going on in this huge world with that kind of noise. So that just brings me back to journalism under fire and what I said about it being a window, because it really took us into their worlds and was a great opportunity to appreciate, how disinformation was affecting them.
Well, that seems like a natural segue to talking a little bit about Mexico and Central America. We 2 years ago at our first Journalism Under Fire conference, the caravan hysteria. This was right after the midterm elections, and we brought in a reporter that was embedded with the caravan to talk about it, which was really fascinating. But Todd, let me ask you a little bit about the panel with Alfredo Corchado, Angela Kucherga, Dudley Althouse, talking about Mexico, talking about the U.S.-Mexico border, talking about journalism along those areas. Was there anything that jumped out at you from that panel? I know we were talking about Cienfuegos, and maybe we want to dip into that issue as well.
Yeah, I hope some of you who are on were able to participate or listen to that. That was such a high quality panel, because not only because of the depth of knowledge of the 3 of them, but because they are all extremely experienced, they're dedicated, and they have a grasp of what is, for us, and by us I mean New Mexicans, anybody living in the border area. This is our core foreign domestic issue. The intersection, it's almost impossible to unravel and say, well, that has to do with just Mexico or just Central America, and this has just to do with just us. Those things are totally integrated. And that came across in every aspect of their discussion. Um, what really struck me was being brought home to, what I was saying before about, well, we've so much of what we pay attention to uh, about Mexico and Central America is driven by the White House, driven by Washington D.C. But what they helped us do was they brought it down to the border, and they gave us a real time appreciation of what is happening right now down there right now and what is going on. And I thought that was extremely useful.
So let's talk about General Cienfuegos a little bit. Let's dip into some current events. Just waving at my son coming to the door. Tell us a little bit about that and your thoughts on that, and why in the world the U.S. decided to drop its charges.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, so just to refresh, General Cienfuegos was the senior Mexican military commander who was then Peña Nieto's Minister of Defense. So the head of Mexico's military, and although there have been lower ranking accusations of corruption in the military, to the extent that the Mexican Marines were pulled because and put on the front lines because they were considered to be not corrupted uh, by the narcotics trafficking. Um, this case, so it's General Cienfuegos in August, shows up in Los Angeles to take his family to Disneyland, basically, and gets arrested. So this did not happen without major case building, probably years, um, and and tied him to a specific offshoot of a drug cartel. Um, so this was probably the single most important case that the Drug Enforcement Agency and Department of Justice have worked on um, for the past several years. So they thought they were on really solid ground. All of a sudden, it bursts on the news with Attorney General Barr himself announcing the dismissal of charges against General Cienfuegos. And I don't know if he's actually been released, but his release and return to Mexico for Mexico's promise that they would continue the investigation against him. It's hard to know exactly what went on, uh, but I can just imagine exploding heads in the State Department, in the Drug Enforcement Agency, in the Department of Justice when this took place. And my bottom line is this was a huge screw up. Somebody at what level I don't know, but authoritatively took the decision that the plan to arrest General Cienfuegos was not shared with the Mexican government, and that would be because, of course, law enforcement is focusing on the case, but it's pretty hard to imagine this did not rise to the level where people had to figure out what impact will this have on U.S.-Mexico relations? What impact will this have on the future law enforcement cooperation between the United States and Mexico? Somebody screwed that up big time. And the winner, of course, was Mexico, because this became a much bigger political issue in Mexico than it did here.
Interesting stuff. We've got some questions here. First one is from Paul Blumhardt. He says, the US media landscape has become so fragmented. There's no Walter Cronkite or similar central authority that everyone sees. And now more people get their news from Facebook than anywhere else, but also from Fox, CNN, MSNBC, Talk Radio, etc. How do we get back to a place where there is some national consensus on some basic truth? What's actually going on in the world, not focused through an advocacy lens, or I would say a biased lens. So how can we have we lost the ability to get to a place of more, I don't know if centralized is the right adjective, but um, more down the middle reporting on what's happening?
I'm not sure I have a good, like concerted and concrete answer. Here's the plan ABC, because it's so much. Something has disintegrated. Something that existed has disintegrated, and now you're faced with a much more difficult task of putting it back together. Um, I think the starting point, though, is that when you say, is there a way to reestablish the integrity of of press, media, in the broader realm, information in the U.S.? The answer is yes. Because we know what it is that needs to be reestablished, and that is the objective of reporting the truth, and that's a universal. The person in the presentations of this week, if you heard Maria Ressa from the Philippines,
Yeah.
I mean that's like her power, the power that came through her enthusiasm and true dedication, um, to that goal in the face of the incredible. I mean, here the Duterte, the head of state, threatened her in a press conference, threatened her assassination. I mean, wow! But thousands of people came out to support her. So she's not in a very secure position, but she has relative security, which is that if the Duterte regime were to somehow or other be connected to her assassination, it's not going to be MBS, killing Khashoggi and getting away with it. There's a different environment there in the Philippines, and I'm just going on a little bit about that because it's the same thing. That same criteria applies to reporting here. This dedication to the truth, and it's that same issue that I was making, that I closed my observations with, which is a lot of this has to do with the role of the state, the role of the government, stepping in, to do some of the things that some of the other presenters were talking about, especially the one last night with Dr. Farid, talking about the need for internet regulation and so changes to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Law that would reestablish or establish sort of rules of the road within the internet, in order to get some control on the wild and craziness that's going on out there. Just two other quick comments on that. One is it's going to take time. This is, repairing and rebuilding, but the need for that kind of regulation is absolutely necessary.
Well, and I loved Farid's comment that towards the end that don't be a knucklehead and don't get your news from Facebook or Twitter. It's just so spot on. We subject ourselves to the vicissitudes of misinformation when we don't go to the actual source and we trust the kind of filter of social media to bring us, a different kind of, or to bring its own brand of news to us. Um, Connected question from Mike Okwache. Hey, Mike. Mike's going to speak for us on Tuesday morning. He's in Nigeria, so it'll actually be his Tuesday afternoon. And he says a really connected point on this, seeing how harmful disinformation is to society. What more do you think that media and journalism, and I'll add us, can do to reduce or get rid of it?
Yeah. Hi, Michael. Um, yeah. What else can we do? Of course, I think, first of all, education is incredibly important dimension of this, um, and making sure that kids, of any age, as they become introduced to information, that in their homes, that learning about these issues becomes part of the value system of their family unit, of their communities, and then becomes part of what's happening in schools, is taught in schools. And I think that um, actually uh, um, Cindy Otis's session was very interesting in that regard. The true, the former CIA analysis who wrote the book True or False. That's kind of like, I mean, it'd be a great high school textbook actually to do that. So there are tools that you can pick up and use for that. And alongside with that is respect for journalists and journalism. That I think that is needs to be part of a value system that becomes part of our society. That so that we, as Americans, like I was saying, we have always taken our First Amendment rights for granted, and they've been very, very seriously challenged in so many ways. But disinformation has been the instrument of war, the instrument of political warfare within our own country, and I'm sure anyone trying to report in Nigeria knows what that's all about.
So one of the things that jumped out at me in watching that documentary, A Thousand Cuts, if you haven't seen it, you got to watch it. It's just fantastic. And but one of the things that really jumped out was some of the unbelievable things that Duterte, the president, is saying from the lectern. Yesterday, I was talking to Patricia Campos Melo, who's Brazilian and will be talking for us on December 2nd. And she has her own stories of what Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil has said very publicly. And I think a lot of us are aware of some of the horrifying things that this man has said verbally. We, of course, have just gone through 4 years of a president who has often said, really, has said things that degrade the office that he represents. So let me segue on that point to Todd. We have a new administration coming in. We have a new, very different kind of president coming in. When it comes to restoring American foreign policy or just taking American foreign policy into a new direction, what do you think are some of the major things that President-elect Biden needs to focus on as we move into 2021?
Uh, that's a good question. I think the interesting thing is, of course, that uh, this is probably the most experienced group of people coming into office, perhaps since the Truman administration.
Hmm.
Um, and this is a group of people that uh, has worked. Many of them have worked together for decades, and the starting point is um, this very important word. Another thing that we often take for granted: trust. Um, so my impression of the Biden team, and I know any number of people associated with it have worked with some of them, is that Biden has always put loyalty at the top. The top of important characteristics, and this is a kind of loyalty that is a complete reverse from what we've had because it goes both ways. Right? These are people who are loyal to each other, and will be loyal to the president, and the president will be loyal to them. It's not to say that there aren't going to be huge disputes and differences. For example, Bob Davis's comment on China. I thought his comments on China were very interesting about trade, and I thought he had a really good way of racking up. That actually Biden is going to try to make China trade issues go away because of the deep divisions within the Democratic Party. What that just leads me up to one comment, which is that I think it's you can go to any recent reporting and get a pretty good read on what the Biden administration's priorities are going to be. Domestic, pandemic number one, restoring employment, this on down the line there. Foreign policy priorities, very clear. His commitment to hold a democracy summit in the first year. That's quite interesting. And in that, information is a very important category, as is anti-corruption. It's gotten a lot of it, not has not gotten a lot of attention. But if you look at the Biden, this Biden commitment to holding a democracy summit, that's one of the concrete initiatives to reducing financial and economic corruption. So these are all things they're putting out now. So we're going to get, pandemic, which is inherently an international, a global issue. It's not a domestic issue. And we're going to get off this business about the pandemic being a sort of a geopolitical competition to who has the first vaccine, nonsense. Then we've got climate change coming, something on immigration, whatever will be possible depending on what's happening in the Senate to stabilize and regularize our immigration situation. But then I just want to make one other comment. Then you've got the thing that tends to drive foreign policy as much as all of your great plans and priorities, which are crises, the things that happen out there in the world, and you are required to deal with them. And I would make I would predict that that's going to also drive what happens early on in the Biden administration.
Well, let me ask you one more foreign policy question, and then I want to talk about digital forensics for a second. So, Mike Pompeo recently announced that they would be issuing a different sanction on Iran every day until that administration goes into the history books. What situation is the Trump administration going to be leaving in terms of Iran for the Biden administration, and what should the Biden administration do when it comes to Iran?
So first, the general point. What the Trump administration is leaving in a nutshell is the wreckage left by 4 years of belligerent nationalism. And the cleaning up will take much more than 4 years. At the core of it, though, again, is trust. What has been damaged and undermined is, in some ways, you can say it's concrete loss of U.S. power and influence relatively, but we knew that was going to happen anyway. What has really been lost is that intangible of trust. So, why would the Iranians trust anything that a U.S. administration says that might last more than 4 years? This is the real challenge. On the other hand, so what is the silver lining? Where else does Iran have to go? That if they want to get out from under the wreckage of belligerent nationalism that loves to wield sanctions as a bludgeon without offering anything else, there needs to be something to offer. I suspect that the Biden administration will be offering something as a way of reopening the door to diplomacy, and then we'll see how that goes. So I think stay tuned for between the lines signaling. Not some big public initiative, and you'll be able to pick it up primarily in the more informed websites, not necessarily, and then in the major newspapers, but it's not going to be a CNN lead TV thing for a while.
And very quickly, do you think the Iran deal or the JCPA can that be immediately revisited and re-signed, or is that again something that's just not going to happen, or something new will have to take its place?
I think that's why I was suggesting, watch early on. The signaling is already going on, so you got to read between the lines, and you'll start to see this shaping up. Probably what we'll see, the first indications of where this is going will be in confirmation hearings or in appointments of second rank people in defense, State Department, National Security Council, and then you can watch the things that they say. In other words, it's not going to be, here's a new treaty, let's negotiate. We're going to have to bring. I don't think that the six party or the group, not the six party, that's Korea, but that the Europeans are going to be a big problem. But getting Russia and China back in the boat on this, that's going to be a very critical task that may take quite some time, even before actual talks can get going with Iran.
And while I wasn't going to ask it, but you raised it, I can't help it. Let's talk about North Korea for a second. We have lots of love letters to President Trump. We have really ultimately a situation with North Korea that's worse than it was before all this correspondence. And I know no one has an answer to this, but I'm still going to ask you anyway. What do you think Biden administration should do in terms of approaching North Korea?
The first thing that Biden administration will be doing, I believe, is securing the alliances with South Korea and Japan, putting that on the front, and attempting to bridge over the serious rupture that took place. It's gotten a lot less notice here. Serious rupture between South Korea and Japan. These are countries that have always had tense relations, deeply embedded in their history as nations. And it's really the alliances with the U.S., the bilateral alliances of the U.S., that's been allowed that to bridge over. So this is like if you get your domestic house in order, the next thing you got to do is get your house in order with your allies. Which is, the Biden administration has very clearly signaled that's going to be their priority when it comes to rebuilding the conduct of foreign relations around the world. But that's not going to be easy. And that will be the prelude to making it very clear what the approach to North Korea is. I'm not saying it's a solution, but the next obvious step will be in diplomacy with China, and re-exploring what is the Chinese perspective to North Korea as a threat. Because North Korea's threat has always been pointed toward the Asian allies in the United States, not against China. But North Korea is not a net positive, especially as an independent decision-making nuclear power in Northeast Asia. So it's not a comfort zone for China either.
So let's come back to journalism, as we'll wrap this in about 7 or 8 minutes. Let's talk about digital forensics. You and I have spoken about it. It's certainly just something I'm so fascinated by. We had Malachi Brown in the first week of the conference talking all about their work on discovering the use of Russian aggression and bombs in Syria. And then this past Wednesday, we had Haley Willis, who is on Malachi's team at the Times, talking about digital forensics. We had Sarah Kalin talking, from her seat now at the Washington Post, which has also done some tremendous stuff on digital forensics. What do you think of digital forensics, and what do you think the tools of digital forensics should focus on in uncovering some of the many things that go on in this world that haven't been covered or that we haven't sufficiently turned our attention to?
This is great, and I'm really happy to talk about it. More than anything else, because it gets us away from talking about disinformation. This is digital forensics, and everything that is related to it is the opposite. It's the mirror image. We walk back out of the looking glass into the world of reality. And digital forensics and the associated information tools applied to the foundational methods of journalism. And here, it's so great that Dana Priest has become the queen of journalism under fire. What an honor. She may not be a household word, but within the world of journalism, she really is, the aristocrat, the leader of that. of and so she embodies as a professional journalist everything that field is supposed to be. And that, in the most challenging aspect of journalism, which is not the hyper fast world of covering the news, but in the deeper field of investigative journalism. So digital forensics and associated technologies, and I'll mention that one aspect of that is the technological tool that enables a greater approximation to the truth. That is its purpose. So where on the one hand we saw with Farid the frontier of technological, with deep fakes, of the technology of creating disinformation platforms. Digital forensics is the opposite. So think about, those of you who are fans of police investigation shows or have been involved in law enforcement. Digital forensics is all about diving deep in very specifically to determine in great detail exactly what happened. The other sort of the related tool that does the opposite is geospatial investigation. So here we're talking about satellite photography, time series, reporting, which uses information tools. For example, I'm doing some work on the Arctic right now, and there's a couple excellent sites that you can go to that show they're maritime trackers. So they show ships transiting the northern sea route in the Arctic. And the geostrategic issue, of course, is that it's an international waterway that's opening up because of climate change. But the Russian intent is to exercise military sea control. So you have a major geostrategic issue developing, largely invisible from us, but you can see what's happening through the maritime trackers, and that allows you a window into it. So to sort of put that in a nutshell, digital forensics is the future of news and the future of reporting. And your man Malachi Brown is very much the leader, not just of his small team, but he's the leader of the field in this.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I look forward to having him back here for sure. So let me wrap up with one final question, Todd, which is something that really jumped out at you from this past week that we haven't talked about, or maybe something that you're looking forward to that's coming up. Give us your thoughts.
So what jumped out at me, just to expand on this idea of the window of the world and journalism, is let's see what happens this year. Clearly, journalists everywhere, they're more than canaries in the coal mine because they have an active role, but we're going to see journalists die. Maybe some of the journalists that we have been watching, or that we'll see in the whole Journalism Under Fire series, will be in jail or maybe even dead over the next year. And we need to remember them, and we need to keep them in our minds, because these are without them, we don't have a window in the world. Even if the cruise industry suddenly sprung to life with vaccines and we were able to take our wonderful vacations around the world, we would still be tourists. That we would not have the ability to in any way have insight into those places in the world that we would go, which tend to be the best places, right? Whereas journalists tend to be our windows into the worst places. So that's one observation, and just to tie that to Journalism Under Fire 4, I think we should, in that sense, track the people that have come and have given their time, and all of the incredible journalists from around the world who were able to come to the events or even participated in this one. and that you know it's up to you, Sandy. You're going to be the one putting this together, which is to make it an even more incredible event, not only held here in person in Santa Fe, but also as a hybrid event, reaching out so that we can put up the big screen and broadcast for people. That's going to be just an incredible multiplier to this.
Yeah, and that's one of the greatest byproducts of this year is, really figuring out how to do the live streams, how to make them work properly, how to connect with people around the world, how to connect to journalism schools around the world. And I think, I can see very clearly how, Journalism Under Fire 4 will indeed be a hybrid event. And not just video being an add-on, but really figuring out how to integrate all of this in a very real way, not only to broadcast out to the world, but also to bring in folks from around the world that may not be able to get to Santa Fe. If we have the chance of having someone like Maria Ressa who, can't fly because she's, being detained or it's just simply too far to come, I think we've seen very well how we can integrate this kind of component into journalism under fire going forward. With that said, Dr. Greentree, let me thank you once again for speaking to us all. You are a man of great knowledge, and thank you for your observations. And wishing you all the best.
Dr. Campbell, thank you very much. Great pleasure, and goodbye to everybody. Enjoy the rest of Journalism Under Fire.
Thank you very much. And just so you all know, we will be resuming Monday at 1 o'clock, where we're going to hear from Secretary David Scrays. We've got a lot to talk about in terms of coronavirus, how our state has responded to it. And that panel is going to really look at how journalism has responded to, the incredible complexity of not just scientific evidence, but also incorporating modeling from the Los Alamos National Lab and bringing that into public policy by way of journalism, helping us, the consumers, and obviously us affected by coronavirus, understanding what we should do as a society to respond. It's going to be super interesting. That's Monday at 1 o'clock. And then we're going to dip into some photojournalism that night. So we have lots of fun treats coming up. I look forward to seeing you then. Meanwhile, have yourself a great weekend. And until then, goodbye.